Alright guys, TacticalRab here again. So I hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. With all the drama caused by Patrick X-Price over the last few days, Clayster has responded and said that this guy has been yapping about this type of stuff for 16 years and he doesn't seem like he's going to be stopping anytime soon, saying that if he was Shotzzy, he would definitely not be listening to his opinion on this type of stuff, and he's playing a character on the flank and his opinions elsewhere can be rather different. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, I wanted to mention this. I'll share the clips for you guys in a couple of minutes, but it's pretty funny how many of these clips we start to see nowadays. If you guys aren't aware of what's going on here, basically at the end of each show day, they will sometimes put like a special secret clip at the end of the video, at the end of the run of show basically, when everyone's tuned out mostly. They sometimes put a little Easter egg clip at the end that people have been going back to find and clipping up and everything like this. There's been some funny ones recently, such as, I'm pretty sure they had the audio. Usually what they'll do is they'll take a funny moment and they'll kind of release the audio from behind the scenes of this, which is stuff the league all has. They also allow all of the teams to get access to this, right? Because we know that when Asim was exposing that CDL referee for washing the dishes in the middle of the game, that was because they had been sent all of the audio files so they could review it from their matches. I think they get sent it if they request it, which I imagine a lot of teams kind of do. So the CDL, of course, has access to all of this stuff, but they don't usually share it publicly unless we're going to an actual listening in the game. But they have the comms the whole time if they, and they record them all so they can send them to the teams. But they also can use them for their own content, right? Which is par for the course. And this is a pretty funny moment here where they smoke LAG 3-0. The vibes in that Subliners camp always tend to be good in series like this. And HyDra just like absolutely roasts them after this and says like, we're never going to get a real rep. We are playing some terrible teams right now. So maybe that's going to mean they're somewhat under practice in these good reps going into that big series against OpTic next weekend or this upcoming weekend. But as I say, I'll share that clip in a second. What we've got to dive into though again is this whole superstar debate. And I'm kind of fed up with this word at this point, but it's been going around so much over the last few days. It's been getting so much traction that Clayster has given his perspective on what he thinks about ACHES. Now, I thought about, we talked about it yesterday morning, right? The whole Shotzzy response, basically saying, like, he doesn't really care what ACHES says. He's going to focus on his own game. And I agree with that assessment really, right? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether anybody considers you to be a superstar, a star, an average pro player, a barely pro player, like, whatever they think, it doesn't matter. If you go up and you play your best COD, if you win the event, who cares what they call you? You're a champion at the end of the day. You're making the money. You're winning the events and all this type of stuff. So that, of course, is the goal. And what people say doesn't matter. But I think this terminology is difficult to define in some ways. And I talked about it yesterday morning. Then I thought about it all day. I was like, okay, how would I define a superstar? How would I like structure the league in terms of which players are average, which players are like below average, which players are the stars, and then which players are the superstars? And I think depending on the way you come up with those definitions, you can go about this in many a different way. And I think that ACHES is right to some degree in his analysis on how many superstars there can be. But it depends. People would argue that all of, Shotzzy, Pred, Dashy, Cell, aBeZy, Simp, and maybe you even throw Drazah and maybe Kenny in there as well. Then you look, of course, at the Toronto guys. Obviously, Scrappy's in there. CleanX is for sure in there. I mean, you kind of want to put Envoy in there to some degree as well, depending on how you're looking at it. And then you look at New York, you've got HyDra, Skyz, like, there's lots of players that could be in that kind of ballpark. And there's some people that will say that all of those players are superstars. And, I can accept that if you're willing to accept as well that there's then a tier above. Because if you're going to have 10 or 15 superstars in a league, there's always going to be a top 10% or a top 5%. Like, you can't tell me that all of those players I've just mentioned are all kind of on the same level. If you want to say it from that perspective, there are tiers of superstars at that point. If you've got 15 superstars or 10 superstars or whatever, then there is a top 4 or 5 of those that are clear of the rest. It's just naturally how it's going to be in anything you possibly look at. So for me, that category of like maybe 15 players are the stars, and then the superstars is like 4 or 5. Now, if you want to say that there's like 15 superstars, then I think you have to say that there's like 4 mega stars or like whatever you want to do. And I don't want to go there with all the stupid terminology. And I'm fed up with this bloody word, I think, at this point. Because with, flow state was the stupid thing we talked about last season. And here we are again. So, Nameless, and we discussed this actually on the Dope Trick show last night because we went in depth and the discussion got pretty heated at times. The chat was going wild about this. And Nameless was watching and he decided, right, yeah, let me get on the show and give his piece on the matter. And we agreed in some parts, we disagreed in other parts. His opinion is that Shotzzy and Dashy are superstars, and I actually agree, I think, with this assessment. But the point that I made on the show last night, and probably half of people agreed with me on this and half people said I was faded for this, but my opinion is that superstars on kind of like any sporting level really are determined by some extent due to the clout they have, the recognizability that they have, the importance that they have within the world and the community and the scene in general, right? So my perspective is that star players, like let's look at Scump for example. During his career, he was obviously an absolute superstar when he was absolutely frying. But let's say years like World War II or years like Cold War, when he was still very good, but was not a guaranteed, top 3 player in the world, was Scump still a superstar? In my opinion, absolutely, because of who Scump was in the scene. He was obviously the face of the league, he was still a very good player, he had still been a very good player in the prior years as well, and sure, maybe he was having a bit of a down year, but was Scump ever not a superstar? Absolutely not as far as I'm concerned. So there is always that element, I think, of that, sure, it's about performance, it's about consistently being in the MVP conversation, but it's also about how important the player is in the ecosystem and outside of the game as well. Like, does the player transcend the sport on some level? It doesn't have to be a crazy level, but I think there has to be some element of that involved, at least in my opinion, when you're considering a superstar of a certain sport. A player like Clay today, or a player like Crim before he retired, I wouldn't necessarily categorize those as superstars, but I would say that they're stars. Now, Clay right now I think is still a star player. He might not be as good as he once was, and from like an MVP numbers perspective, he's not a star player. But I think it's Clay, 3-time world champion, icon, legend of the scene. He's still a star in my mind. If I'm forming a team, I'm still considering Clay to be a star player to some extent because of how important he can be to the franchise. So my opinion is really that you can be a star if you are either consistently in MVP level conversations, or you are massively important and can transcend the scene to some degree, and you can be a superstar if you have both of those things. Bit of nuance here in play, just because my feeling also is that, if you tick both of those boxes, but yet you're still maybe second or third fiddle on your team, then I think you have to consider that a little bit as well, because, like, if I look at OpTic, I look at Shotzzy. Like, to me, he is the face. There's also an element, as I discussed yesterday, of, like, play style. Like, the way that Shotzzy plays the game, just the magical, like, things that he's able to do, add another level to just why he's considered in that category as far as I'm concerned. Same, I think, applies to Dashy as well, just because we know that his raw aim is basically unmatched in the league. If you're Pred, to me, in the MVP conversations, big personality and player and all these other things, and, by my definition, therefore, Pred's a superstar. But I don't know, I look at it and I think you can certainly argue that, absolutely. But at the same time, it's like, well, if you join OpTic, do you like automatically become a superstar? No. And that wasn't the case for the likes of Ghosty or for Hook or for Illy or for other players like this over the last few years. So there is more to it than just that. But also, if you're not like top 2 superstar level player on your team, then maybe it counts a little bit less. I don't know. I think there's a bit of nuance. I'm not fully made up my mind on exactly how I would structure this whole thing. And I do kind of hope this is the last we talk about it, right? Because the debate, I think, is, kind of tiresome. And it's really just all about how you define certain terms and what terms you decide to use. But Clayster gave his thoughts on this as well. And he says effectively to ACHES last night. So ACHES, of course, has been giving his thoughts on the flag shows for a very long time. And Clay says, like, I ain't listening to what this guy has to say. He's been yapping about this type of stuff for 15 years. He's not going to be changing anytime soon. And, players like Shotzzy and others shouldn't be listening to him.
Do you agree with ACHES takes? First time chatter.
Motherfucker,
do you think I listened to a single one of Patrick Price's takes? That dude has been spewing since 2009. To this day, he still spews. 16 years. He's fucking go, boys.
Say what you want, Clay, but Patrick Price is right. He's just fucking right.
Oh, he plays a character on the flank.
No, he doesn't. He's just so rarely speaking in the fact.
Bro, listen to him on like when he does like other podcasts. He's like actually like then has.
No,
like,
you're lying.
No.
You're just mad. He's schizophrenic. You're just mad.
So we know that Shotzzy and Clay teamed for some time back on the Dallas Empire days, of course, to very good success. Won that World Championship together that year, so he knows how good Shotzzy is. Shotzzy knows how good Shotzzy is, and it doesn't really matter what Ake says. You know, the reality is what it is. And as Kismet says, superstar this, superstar that. People should just strive to be great. Greatness is measured on how you inspire those around you and become more than they thought was possible. It implies to all aspects of life. So I think lots of people are also agreeing that this whole superstar word that I've said so many times over the last few days is probably not the best measure of what's going on here. But also as Clay writes that ACHES play is a bit of a character. I mean, look, everybody knows this, and I can't believe people still get as riled up by ACHES as they do. Like, it's so obvious that ACHES is playing a game, and I find it funny from both sides, right? Like, the flank has been catching some criticism for the way that it goes. And look, it does frustrate me when Ben and ACHES basically just cannot ever see eye to eye on anything. ACHES will just continue to shut down Ben's point before he can even say it. And I get the entertainment value in that. And, I mean, it works, right? Like, there were so many viewers on that show. And because ACHES is saying what he says, and people are getting in there to hate watch or whatever you want to say, to talk their trash in the chat. And it's working out for the show, for sure. Some people don't like that, and I understand that as well. But, you know, it obviously works, right? And ACHES knows what he's doing here as a personality in the space. But if you do listen to ACHES on other shows, Reverse Sweep elsewhere, like, he does give more measured opinions on these type of topics, and I think that's kind of what Clay's getting across. But as we've seen from Shotzzy, he doesn't really care on what they talk about here on these type of shows. And I certainly do think that is the right mentality to have. Just before we close out, I wanted to look at the actual schedule for this upcoming weekend. So a couple of days away. As I said actually yesterday, probably the pre-show we do is going to be more entertaining than the actual matches themselves based on what we are seeing here on this Friday. But I mean, have a look at this. We've got Surge Legion and we've got Gorillas Thieves. It's like, oh my god. I know Ben made this point as well the other day that maybe the league should be able to change these around more than they do, because they set this schedule and it stays the same the whole year. But you gotta think that putting at least one of the interesting teams, like, they could swap these games and put Ultra Thieves on the Friday maybe, but then I guess that would mean the Saturday's terrible. I don't know, there's just a lot of just tragic games, and it's not great really, is it, until we get to Sunday, at which point the final game, thankfully, should be kind of entertaining. So OpTic versus New York, of course, is going to be the standout series of the weekend, the final game on the Sunday to determine the #1 seed. And while, to be fair, every match leading up to that point is still important in terms of qualification, like even Rocker are 1 in 5, they can still get to winners because of just how bad some of the teams are at the bottom of the league right now. So every match is important, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every match will be entertaining. But very much interested to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.
Oh, no. Kill him, kill him. Go find him, Kiss. Fuck is he?
Fire dog.
What's he doing? Bling! I gotta kill you,
Bro, we are never getting a real red.
When Gracie was first born and she was laying in the hospital room with us, I legitimately thought, because of her hair was wet, obviously coming out of Haley's womb, because there's fluids, and her hair looked like it was red, right? And I'm like, wait, did we have a ginger? Hold on, let's investigate. So later, when she was in the hospital room, her nipples, obviously she's a baby, I get that, but proportionately speaking, her nipples were so small. I thought of you when we lived together. I'm like, yo, she's a ginger because her nipples are fucking tiny.
What?
I swear to God, that was a real. I told that to Haley.
Dude, Sam.
The size of his newborn